Welcome to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. On today's show, we're looking into 2020 by looking back at some of the biggest global financial stories that shaped our world. Amidst the US-China trade war, a slowdown in Latin American economies and Britain's bitter divorce from the EU, in 2019, Africa remained a continent of great interest. While China is likely to maintain its position as being the continent's largest investor in 2020, Russia, America and the United Kingdom are all seeking to renew their ties with the future economic growth engine of the world.
Enjoying 20 years of political stability. Somebody has lost the election.
Because the City of London is going to is still now key to unlocking that investment.
There seems to be a big desire on the part of the British government to see that they rebuild the relationship, especially the commercial relationship that existed between Nigeria and the UK in the past. So that is the reason why I actually made the effort to fly in to come in for this particular event. Quite a few countries are realizing the potential of Africa. And when you talk about Africa, you can't but talk about Nigeria. Nigeria holds a lot of potential, especially with regard to the population. We have a large educated population. It's a large market. And so I think people are slowly waking up to the realization that they have to engage and get involved. The mandate of my ministry is to encourage industrialization in the country, to encourage people to open more industries, to encourage those who already have industries to expand those industries. The idea is that the more industries you have, the more people you get employed. The more people you get employed, that is where the trickle down comes.
I really want Nigeria to be front and centre. We've heard so much from all of those people here today about the amount of interest globally that there is in investing in Nigeria, because people right across the globe recognise the size of the market, the huge range of opportunity that Nigeria presents. We're going to be working between now and January with the Nigerian government and private sector to really make sure that we seize that opportunity. We get the message out to people that it's not easy doing business in Nigeria, as is the case for many emerging markets. But A, it's possible, and B, it is well worth the effort.
Since Western sanctions were imposed in 2014 over the annexation of Crimea, Putin is seeking new geopolitical friends and business opportunities. But at what cost to Africa? Lagan, let me start with you.
I mean, if you look at the cost and the benefit, Russia has had a long-standing interest in Africa going back to post-independence, 1960. Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, and even involvement in the Nigerian Civil War. They are known for their hard power, i.e. selling military assets and fighter planes and arms, and they're the second biggest arms producer in the world. Therefore, Russia has always maintained some form of interest in Africa. The question remains how much of influence. And truth be told, in comparison to America, in comparison to China, they are still lagging behind in terms of the level of investment in various areas. But over the past 15 years, investment has risen almost 200%. On the continent. They are involved in mining in Zimbabwe, they're involved in oil and gas in Angola, and they are trying to re-emerge themselves as a global power, and they are fully aware that in order to do that, Africa must be at a large part of their influential base.
You've given us a good background. Thanks for that history lesson there, Lagan. I'm sure the viewers were really interested in that. But what's in it for Putin then, Tenny? What exactly is he looking for in, or shall I say, underground in Africa?
I think more so it's to displace the US and China and become that superpower, that ultimate superpower. Obviously, Africa has the greatest resources. Everybody's trying to get into there. They're trying to build nuclear bases in there, and they're trying to make their connections a lot more tighter than what it was previously, because they find that there is value in there. There is a long-standing history between Russia and US. It's not uncommon knowledge, and it's a power struggle. Africa is that chess piece in the middle.
Why is Africa becoming a chess piece? Can we not take control of this? One of the reasons why China seems to be dominating and doing so well in Africa, because they're not listening to the concerns of the World Bank. They're not listening to the concerns of the IMF. You know, they're turning their back to human rights records or things such as corruption. But do you think that now Africans, or certainly those of us in the diaspora, are starting to say, hang on a moment, those regulations and rules may not be colonial. They may be for the best interest of Africa. Maybe we do need to look at exactly what these governments are doing. Why is the Russian and African relationship so secretive?
I think if we look into the global structure and the development of the modern world, Africa is a vital piece on the chessboard. We have been unable to take powers into our own hands in terms of our own domestic investment and in terms of infrastructure, purely because historically we've been ill-equipped. We all fully well know who the global powers are and how they manipulate countries, and
who are they?
America, China, Russia to a lesser extent, Britain, the former colonial masters at the end of the day.
You've got to say France.
Yeah, France, obviously as well, and they have developed and created a system in which Africa is dependent on them. In terms of various aspects, whether it's investment, whether it's infrastructure, we cannot build our own railways. Therefore, we need expertise and loans from China.
But we're not.
Yes,
I mean,
totally agree.
That's even a question in itself.
Wow. We can't build our own railways. We can't develop our own infrastructure.
Sadly, if you look at the government tenders on majority of African countries, only maybe Egypt has a company domestically who have enough resources and power and technical nous to build a long-standing railway, which actually saddens me at the end of the day.
It is sad. I'm sorry to keep saddening you. There's a shocking statistic, but here it is. 620 million people in Africa don't have electricity. Tenny, Russia has a lucrative nuclear power industry. Is it a win-win situation?
Yes and no. There's a positive to it because Russia has the power and the money, the funds.
What power?
Well, it has the funds to actually implement a nuclear solution.
Nuclear power.
You understand? The downside to it is, what is the long-term cost going to be? At the moment, we can get it now from Russia, but what do we have to sacrifice as a result of it? What is it going to look like down the line? If we could come together, I mean, there are people in the diaspora who want to come together and fund it, because the amount of investment that they're actually pumping into Africa is actually not that significant. It's not. Compared to what China could do, compared to what the US could do, both of those countries are not doing it. Russia are coming in with a relatively small amount and are able to do, trying to accomplish something like this. Why can't we, as an African nation, come together and unite together and actually...
That's one of the issues. You know, there was a recent forum that Bloomberg held, and a lot of the bigwigs, the guys with the power there, they were saying one of the issues that Africa has is that when they're looking for investment, they're going country by country. Nigeria will go, Angola will go. They said they're wondering why Africa isn't going by itself, as a whole entity, and saying, look, we're looking for investment. Do you think those discussions are being had where they're thinking, hang on a minute, there's 54 of us, let's go together, let's be stronger?
That would be the dream. I'm almost certain that was the cardinal belief when the African Union was created. A forum to bring us together, a forum to ensure that we can move together. And so my only hope is that in time we can foster a unity between us and focus domestically within ourselves rather than having to always look abroad.
It's very interesting. Of course, Russia does have quite a strong relationship with Nigeria, but they said that lots of their area of interest is in Zimbabwe, Angola, Congo, Namibia, the CAR, I don't want to offend any of our viewers, but doing abysmally at the moment. Do you think a lot of the countries, a lot of the West and the Eastern bloc that are coming into Africa, they tend to go to a lot of these countries that are, kind of poverty-stricken?
Yes, I do.
Is that kind of the problem? Do you know what I mean? Like countries that can't really defend themselves.
They seem to thrive in the areas of most instability.
Yeah.
It does seem
You
like.
said it.
Yeah, because if you look at CAR about 4 years ago, domestic coup, it was Russia who ended up training their presidential guard afterwards and sending them 45 crates of Kalashnikovs. If you look at areas like the Gambia, if you look at even Senegal, like Russia is involved in like arms trade. Zimbabwe, they had no issue doing deals with Mugabe and now the new person who is there. So it seems that they don't mind cutting best practice in order to achieve their inevitable goal, which is mineral resources and profit.
It says the US has a consumer market of over 300 million people with purchasing power of $13 trillion. How likely is it, or how realistic is it, that African producers can tap into that market?
Well, there's a lot of opportunities. Recently, they've sent the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, a highly placed American figure, recently to visit a number of African countries, Sudan, I think Ethiopia, and a few others. And the same message of trying to showcase the market opportunities for Africa producers, and vice versa, because also Africa has a very big, vibrant market. So it's a two-way thing, and I think they're trying to construct that one-stop shop of investment two ways that can flow in and out.
Investment two ways, but of course we discussed it on this show, trying to celebrate the new African Trade Union Agreement. So we want Africans want Africans to trade within themselves. But do we want to constantly be consuming and importing foreign goods when we can actually do it continentally?
Well, it's interesting that this American initiative is coming close to the signing of the Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Every country.
We have the Ghanaian president. He was at a summit, a diaspora summit with Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, recently, and he said in the interest of the European and the African relationship, it's never benefited Africa. So with us, there seems to be something that's not going right. We never seem to get the best bite out of the cookie.
Yeah, because if you look at African countries, right from the word go, we've always relied on the foreign countries, and the relationship that we've built over the years has always been master-slave kind of relationship.
Is it still that way?
It's indirectly that way, because when it comes to negotiating with the African countries, we go with our bulls in hand, begging for arms, more or less, rather than actually looking at the trade relationships and the advantages that we can get from them. So if you look at the American market, 16 trillion, you said? $13
trillion of purchasing power. But do they want African goods?
And Africa, yes, of course. So Africans have to be cleverer, and the AU have to come together, find a way to, just like you said, find a way to streamline our policies and all that to make sure that we take advantage of the market. So we have so much to sell to the Americans.
We have so much to sell, and let's hope we can have a policy that's good for the entire continent.
Africans in the diaspora, UK companies working in Africa, international investors, Africa-friendly investors, I would actually say, rather than international, but they are international. And then there's the opportunity for government projects as well, whether it's UK government going into Africa in some sort of development program, or whether it's African government saying, we need this problem solved, but we don't know how to do it.
Yes.
So, it's a forum for really accelerating business and investment.
Considering they're getting so much attention from the likes of China, we know Russia has got massive interest in Africa at the moment. Do they care about the small man? Of course he's not small, but I use it in a kind of global business term. Do they care about that? Are they more focused on those big foreign direct investments, or are they starting slowly to see the significance of small diaspora projects such as this?
Well, I think any educated economist recognizes that the SME is the powerhouse of developed communities.
Coming up, we'll be looking at Africa's quid pro quo relationship with China. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. On today's show, we're looking into 2020 by looking back at some of the biggest global financial stories that shaped our world. A decade ago, China overtook America to become Africa's largest trading partner. The presence of China has loosened many African countries' dependence on Western governments for development, as Chinese loans come without the demands for the improvements on human rights that often accompany British or American aid. For China, these inroads have helped it gain access to vital mineral resources abundant on the continent. However, this relationship does have its critics. Some observers believe that Chinese loans catch vulnerable developing countries in debt traps, depleting government coffers and stick generations of taxpayers with gigantic bills. African governments have fiercely denied that such takeovers could happen. Is this really a win-win relationship, or is it a new type of colonisation?
It's interesting, isn't it? You know, it's a catch-22, because one of my next questions was going to be whether or not Western media still has a dominance on the continent, and I presume you'll be saying yes. I've also heard from a lot of my colleagues and friends on the ground that a lot of Chinese media companies are doing very well in Africa, you know, especially if you can't pay for those DSTV or other subscriptions. If they cut off, you will still get Chinese news.
Well, it is very true that Chinese are investing massively in the African media landscape. I'm in South Africa, in Cape Town right now, and for instance, we know that some Chinese interests have invested in several of the biggest media here in South Africa, but that's also the case for Start Time, for instance, and a few others, not to mention, obviously, the CGTN and Xinhua. But if you look at the actual situation, I don't think Chinese has to be stigmatized. I think it's a more broad phenomenon. During the last, I would say, 10 years, but 5 years really, we've seen an increased number of international media investing across the continent.
There's never been a better time for African countries to take advantage of the New World Order, where we have the Chinese all over Africa.
It's interesting you say New World Order. Where does America placing this? Because when you hear of New World Order, USA is really kind of on the back burner, right?
Yes. But when you look at the, I just look at the advantages that are meant to come out of this, because China is very aggressive in Africa, while the Western countries have slipped back. If you look at the trade volume between China and Africa in the past 16 years, how it's grown astronomically from 10 billion in 2002 now to, we're talking about almost $200 billion, whereas it's slipping with regards to the US and to countries like Germany or Europe in general. So it's an advantage for African countries to take advantage of this. I will look at the positives rather than even though we know that behind all of this is the politics. Politics of how the China, Europe and American, trade war.
Is the United States of Africa becoming a reality? Kayode, let me come to you first. Could Africa become the new USA?
Possibly.
Well, I know it's a big statement.
It's huge, but let's ask ourselves where we are now. We're not doing well enough in terms of internal trading relationships within Africa. The so-called freedom of movement of Africans within Africa for free movement of goods and services. Let's take the regional cooperation like ECOWAS. It's not going well.
Is it functioning?
It's not functioning well, and you still have those restrictions and limitations for someone in, say, Nigeria to go and settle and work in Sierra Leone or in South Africa. It's a huge problem. So I don't know where they get this idea that it's just suddenly going to change the dynamics. I think even with the structure that we have now, let's perfect the the platforms that we have to make freedom of movement for Africans within Africa possible, trading relationships amongst and bilateral relationships amongst African states. We need to improve on that. Otherwise, it's going to be just another celebration of an utopian dream by African leaders that doesn't translate into the people of Africa. Yeah, the first thing is we need to look at what we produce and what we consume. I mean, if most of the thing, if 90% of what we consume as Africans are produced outside Africa, where do you trade? You trade with China, you trade with Europe. Even let's take security, for example. Nigeria needs, there's a lot of security challenges in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon. And if you need drones, where do you go to buy drones? You go to France, you go to China. And in South Africa, they are actually producing some of these amenities that we need. You know, so if you want to fly from Ghana to Johannesburg or to East Africa, it's easier for you to fly to England than within the continent.
It's ridiculous.
So we need to change our product, what we consume. You know, we need to increase our capacity as Africa as a continent. We need to increase the capacity to produce what it needs. If you now increase the production capacity of the consumption within Africa, then you will the trading links and trading relationships within Africa would increase more than going to buy toothpick from China, for example.
Of course, it's funny, but it's actually a reality, and that's one of the issues. A lot of other negative portrayals of this trade union have been about the infrastructure. You know, they said, yeah, you know, this is great, but how are we going to get our goods from A to B when the roads are not there? They're unsustainable. Infrastructure is a huge issue, isn't it, Rex?
Yeah, it's terrible, because if you try to apply even around the ECOWAS region, you would see the challenges. Even the border is not the border.
It's not secure.
It's I'm ashamed to even say this, but you see them asking you for bribes, and you're within the ECOWAS region. So I want to ask you, if it's you know, business is for profit, and you can get a certain good from China at $5. So why would you want to get it from somewhere in South Africa for $7?
Yes.
There's no sense in it.
Nigeria has the largest population in Africa, and they felt they will be at a disadvantage because all the goods and services will be coming in. They will be dumped into Nigeria. It's going to kill local manufacturing industry. So government had to listen to the concerns of the labor and manufacturers within Nigeria, and then look at areas where the documents would not be against Nigeria. And I think once that was sorted out, it was signed. And I think for good reason, it was important for government to consider the concerns of local manufacturers within Nigeria.
What about minerals? A lot of reasons why some countries, they say, were staying behind is because they're still competing with themselves. You know, a lot of them have the same things that they want to trade outside of the continent, and there'll be competition. Do you think there's still an unhealthy competition amongst African countries, Rex?
Yeah, but I feel right now most of the minerals are being exported out of Africa. So I don't think it will be a challenge, because you can hardly see an African country buying, let's say, gold, for instance, from Accra and taking it to somewhere in Kenya. So these things are exported. So I don't think it would be a challenge. I don't think so.
What are some of the benefits that you can see from this? Because, you know, whether we like it or not, and you know, we don't want to sound too negative, so please don't come at us. But, you know, it is a historic moment. Africa is finally seeing that, you know, they are better together.
I think you can actually put those symbols in place, then at least you have a roadmap for people to follow. So there won't be any excuse. Say, for example, if, you're trying to trade within Africa, and then you have presidents and leaders of African countries say this is the way to go, then you have no excuse for implementation. And then peer review is an opportunity for every country to review themselves, our ease of doing business. For example, Nigeria had been talking about this ease of doing business for quite a while, and now we
don't do too well on that.
Yeah, you can pick visas. Actually, now you don't need business visas. You can go to the airport, you apply online, and a lot of African countries are looking at that. So there are some positives where you can now say, okay, this structure is in place. How do we now do ease of doing business across Africa and not just within a country in the continent?
Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.